Nous avons écouté David Roberts qui va nous parler de comment être concret quand on n'a pas de choix.
Sorry, just getting things sorted out. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I heard you. Yes.
Okay. Let's see. That.
Okay.
All right. There. Sure. Okay. So, thank you for the organizers to having me speak here. So I never met Jean Bernabeu in person. I almost crossed paths with him at Topos a la AHS. Must be nearly 7 years ago. We didn't quite get to meet each other. We had some exchanges on the category theory mailing list at one point, maybe about 2011 or so, just about the relationship between distributors and anaphunctors, which was interesting to sort of find a little bit more out about some of the work he'd done that I wasn't aware of. So, yeah, so this work is joint with Barty Kavanen. It hasn't been written up, but it's kind of, in preparation, and at some point it'll land. Sorry, whoops. Okay. So yeah, someone on Math Overflow pointed me to this paper of Kuchera. This talks about concrete categories, or rather this result that how close can an arbitrary sort of category be to being concrete? And the proof starts out with this rather peculiar statement. Sorry, I will, just before I continue, where's the chat? I was just going to, my slides are available at the link in the chat if anyone wants to read along at home. Okay, so yeah, so this article, the proof of Kuchera, starts with take a category and assume that its objects are ordinals. Like, that's it. Like, just my category, the objects are ordinals, and this was very strange. And I thought this was a bit weird, and it's sort of not very much in keeping with the nice sort of constructive type of reasoning you might expect with sort of abstract category theory that is sort of not particularly talking about sort of set theoretic stuff. It's just just truly strange. And so anyway, I complained about this, and Marty sort of had some ideas, and then we sort of managed to figure something out. So just as a very little reminder, right? So a concrete category was one with a faithful functor to set, and sort of all the standard categories of mathematical things are usually concrete. Category of spaces, of groups, the one category of small categories. Any small category itself is concrete. You can send every object to the target fiber. And famously, non-examples are the classical homotopy category, where you quotient the hom sets of the category of topological spaces by the relation of homotopy. Also, you take isomorphism classes of functors. So if you want, you take the two category of small categories and then take isomorphism classes of functors. So neither of these are concrete. But Kuchera's theorem, and as we saw, it requires the axiom of global choice, and it's sort of set in von Neumann Bernays Gödel set theory. Every locally small category is a quotient of a concrete category by some congruence on its hom sets, which is sort of quite nice, right? Because right? This means that the classical homotopy category is in some sense typical, right? Every category is somehow in some sense sort of a homotopy category of some concrete category. And so as we saw, every small category is concrete. So really we only have to care about large categories. And we need to talk about locally small categories, because otherwise you can't, you know, if you're talking in very sort of foundational terms and you're allowing locally large categories, you're not going to get a faithful functor to something that's locally small like set. So we kind of situate ourselves in this space, large locally small categories. But like this proof was very delicate, right? It's saying I need to well order the proper class of my objects, and then also use that to then put like this ordinal structure on the objects, and you got to do these really strange things. So it would be nice to make this foundation agnostic, right? So that it doesn't matter which sort of foundations I assume, then the result will still work. But we will be assuming classical logic. I don't really know how to make this work sort of completely constructively. There's one step which I'll point out partway through. Okay, so here's some things we're going to talk about. So algebraic set theory first, and then the sort of nitty gritty of how we get the concrete category we need, and then the sort of extension to a different result in the same space. So a lot of people are probably familiar with the elementary theory of the category of sets of Levier, where we say the category of sets has these properties. It's a well-pointed topos with the axiom of choice, and that's good enough for a foundation of mathematics for pretty much anything you want to do that's not explicitly set theoretic, pretty much. But sometimes you really want to talk about large structures, and one option to doing this is to axiomatize, instead of the category of sets, the category of classes. So the category of classes is not a topos, because you don't have like arbitrary power classes of a proper class. But at the very least, the category of proper classes, say in like ZFC, is a pre-topos. And you want to sort of you want to know what like smallness means, so you have some data to talk about what smallness means. And instead of just saying, like I have some subcategory of small objects, it's better to talk about being able to talk about families of small things. So we have and all of my categories here are going to be Boolean. I'm not going to say the word Boolean all the time, but it's written, I think, everywhere where it should be. And if it's not, it probably is meant to be there too. So we have a pre-topos where the internal logic is Boolean. So sub-objects are complemented. And we have some subcategory which has all the same objects. And the arrows of this subcategory are small. And we have sort of usual stability conditions. We have I have a weakened 2 out of 3. So like composition of small things is small, but then you have this one-sided 2 out of 3. And we have sort of a weakened one on the other side relative to some sort of what would be a surjective map, and some stability under coproducts. And okay, so that's kind of fairly innocuous data, but here's the thing which gives us a special juice, like much like power objects do for regular toposes. So you have a small power object. So this is meant to be like considered the category of all classes, and then you can make, for instance, in ZFC, you can make the proper class of all subsets of a class. So this is a perfectly well-defined thing. And then, so we have an object that acts like this, right? So it's something like, I want all the subsets of my class C, but it's a sort of abstract characterization. And how do we know it's subsets? We have the usual sort of universal relation, which is like elementhood relation, but it's a small relation, which I have the definition down in the footnote there, and it's universal among small relations. So it's really saying that for each, if you like, each element of the small power object, the things that belong to it, there's only a set worth of those. What we mean by a set. So some examples. So we can, we're not forced to take, obviously, like, a category of classes. There are some interesting sort of toy models. So you can take something like just the category of sets in the normal sense, but your smallness is relative to some infinite regular cardinal. Right. And so here, in some sense, small, like, if kappa was inaccessible, then it would be something like, oh, that's a Grothendieck, gives me a Grothendieck universe, and then the small things look like itself look like a topos. But we can be a bit weaker and just say just a regular cardinal. I could actually just upper bound my size of my sets, and so, like, kappa is the size of, like, the universe, and then everything smaller than kappa is something small. So we can go down into sort of more classical set theory. So you can define something that's called the syntactic category of ZF, which is like the objects are proper classes. Like, a proper class in ZF is a purely syntactic thing. It's a formula. It's a first order formula in the language of set theory, and the with one free variable, and the sets that satisfy that belong to that class. And so there's a really nice paper by Sergio Maschio talking about this. Got all the references at the end of the slides. You can also do the same sort of thing where you take a theory called ZF minus, where it's like ZF set theory. You take out the axiom of power set, and you kind of have to tweak some of the other axioms just a tiny bit so that things still make sense. You can do the usual operations that power set would normally give you for free. And then you can, like, these are somehow, this is really a category of sets, This is kind of category of classes. But they're somehow, like, set theorists like to say they're only talking about sets, and classes are a shorthand, where you can have a axiomatization literally of classes in a traditional mode. So von Neumann, Gödel's, Bernays class set theory. And then on a more structural sort of category theoretic bent, you can talk about the category of ideals in a Boolean, in a topos. So I'm not going to go into this construction, but it's somehow like saying, what if I wanted to build the category of proper classes out of a topos, where I think of the topos as some, like, base set theory in a category theoretic sense. And then, like, the original topos is the subcategory of small objects. So there's some properties of these axioms. Like for a topos, if you take the slice category, it's again one of these basic class categories. You can exponentiate small objects. So you have, like, an internal hom from a small object to an arbitrary object. But because everything's stable under slicing, you have some very limited sort of local Cartesian closure. And you can talk about what does it mean to have a universal object, because in the category of classes, you have, like, the class of all sets, and every object, like every class, embeds into the class of all sets in, like, ZFC, for instance. And so we can say what it means to be a universal object. Every object emits a monomorphism to it. And then if you have a universal object, you can build a universal small map, so that every map every small map is a pullback of this. So it's like an internal universe type thing. Okay. So any questions so far? Any comments? Okay. Okay. I'll just keep going. But please don't hesitate to sort of pop in and ask as I go. Okay. So, all right. So that's kind of the ambient setting. So it captures the traditional stuff, but also allows for, like, all kinds of variants. But the whole point of this is, so we want to talk about, like, large categories in a sensible way. All right. So if we have an internal category in one of these basic class categories, that's like a large category, right? So if you have an internal category in a topos, that's like a small category, because the topos is somehow like category of sets, and then an internal category in that is like a small category. And so if I want to talk about large categories, I can talk about internal categories in one of these basic class categories. And any internal category can be externalized. So you get a fibration, the family's fibration. And if you have an universal object, you get a full internal category. And you can this internal category is like the category of sets. It's internal to like my category of classes, but it's in itself an internal category. And so if we want to talk about something that's concrete, then we've got a category of sets that we can take like internal functors to, or maybe sort of slightly weaker options, but that's a good start. But like this construction, right? This construction of the category of sets, internal category of sets, comes from a certain construction where you take the universal small map, right? This elements EL thing, it's the universal small map, and then there's a particular construction which I've just called full, and it's like full of a map. It takes like the locally sort of the full internal category on that family of sets, right? So if I have a family of sets indexed by any class, I can think of what is the category of sets where the objects are the sets in that family. And so if you had any small map, right, its fibers are sort of internally speaking sets. And so we can form one of these sort of internal categories. And if we had a faithful internal functor to it, that's like, I'm going to represent the domain of that faithful functor. Its objects are like fibers of that small map. And there's some kind of nice constructions you can do. So there's some stability here of this construction. Okay, so so far we haven't kind of explored the full strength. There's a class, so a basic class category is enough to talk about some of this stuff, but then a plain class, a class category is one where you say, I want a universal object. And I also want the power class of a small object to be small. The previous axioms just said I could take any object, I get a power class. But it's a very predicative sort of setup where, I'm not assuming that power sets are actually sets type of a philosophy. But I can sort of add that as an additional axiom. And then this is again, everything's stable under slicing, and it's rather nice. And yeah, my examples from before, they're all of this, they all satisfy these additional conditions, except for the sort of ZF without power set. But so this is the plain definition, right? A power object of a small object is small, except it would be nice to be able to talk about this in families, and we can actually do better than this. So just like for a topos, we have power objects, and then you can build like the contravariant like power object functor. I mean, you maybe have to use a little bit of choice or something or other maybe to like build that functor, but there's ways to get around that if you don't want to use sort of external choice. So let's think about, all right, functoriality for small power objects. If I want to do contravariance, I need the preimage of a subset to be a subset. And so I'm going to have functoriality with respect to small maps. So this is I can think about so the codomain fibration of my class category, and then I can think about the fibration, which is a subcategory where the maps are small, right? So I've got maps sort of making commuting triangles, and those sort of horizontal maps are small. And then I have something inside that again, which is where I'm only considering like small families of small objects. And there's a construction. It must be due to Benabu. I'm sure that's Thomas Straka will probably confirm this, but where you can, in a purely elementary sense, think about taking the fiberwise opposite of a fibration. If you had an index category, you could say, I'm going to pass to sort of the opposite type of thing. But here you can just do it purely with fibrations. And then you get this, you can build this a functorial construction. So it's a massive superscripts and subscripts here. But it's essentially the sort of massively souped up families version of the contravariant power set functor, but in this like class category generality. So it's an ANA functor here. So I'm not assuming any choice, like even in like the meta theory. And so everything is so by an ANA functor, I mean, something in like Michael Mackay where you say, I don't have like a chosen power object for everything. I have like all the possible power objects that I could get. It's a bit like saying, oh, look, is there a functor which assigns a limit to every diagram? It's like, well, there are all these possible different limits, and it's a way of sort of keeping track of all that. If I knew that E itself, if I knew that the codomain fibration was cloven, then I could replace this by an ordinary fibered functor. So if I had chosen pullbacks, for instance, in my category E, I could replace this by a something a bit nicer. Yeah, so if it's a basic class category, I only know that the sort of power, the small power objects of small things, they could be anything. But if I've got a class category, the stronger version, then the power objects of small things are small. And this works in fiberwise as well. Okay, so that's kind of a lot of sort of technical setup. But it's all very much more algebraic, right? This is not in a very classical set theoretic mode. Everything is now much more flexible. It captures all this classical set theory, but you can also do very category theoretic thinking as well. And you can switch your set theory around as well. So that's if you want to use that. So got to get down to a bit of nitty gritty. So, what so the thing that Kuchera's proof essentially gave was some kind of, recall we want to assume, the assumption was the objects of my category are ordinals. And really that's only there so that you can get some kind of ordering on the objects of your sort of starting category. And really you want that ordering so you can have some kind of notion of morphisms that are kind of going up the ordering or going down the ordering. And so we're going to sort of supply a bunch of axioms, sort of purely sort of internalizable axioms that captures the necessary behavior. So here's the sort of formally written definition. But I have an informal description of what this means. So this is the informal description. You want every morphism to factor as a left map followed by a right map. And any map that looks like sort of a wrong way composition, so it's a right map followed by a left map that goes a wrong way, then it turns out that it's either already in the left class or the right class. So, and if you have two composable maps from the right class, then the composite is in the left class, then they were already in the left class. Right, so the intersection of the left and right classes is like each of L and R are a subcategory, so their intersection is a subcategory. So yeah, if you start in R and you compose and you end up in L, then you know you're in R already, but it means that you had to have come from L as well. And then this is the crucial bit, right? So this is where the sort of this ordinality type of well-foundedness comes, sort of as a sort of still is around. So you think about the left maps with a fixed domain. There should only be like a set worth of those, or a small collection of those, and sort of symmetrically for the right morphisms. And this is like what this bit is what the whole like assume my category is a category of ordinals was really trying to capture. There's some kind of smallness coming from the well-foundedness of ordinals. And so here's the one bit where we need some kind of Booleanness. So it's kind of annoying. It'd be nice to not need this, but this is what we got. So you want if you're in the sort of the union of the left class and right class, right? So L and R are both like sub-objects of the object of morphisms. So they have a union. You want the if you're not in the left class, then you know you're definitely in. Like there is some other sub-object that you're in. So this is somehow like the restricted right class. It's the right class that's not doesn't intersect the left class. And if you have this, then this right map here is like I take a left map and a right map, I compose them, and I'm in. You know, the axiom says that this lands in L union R, and then I can tell where my factorization came from. So if I know that if my factorization, if I compose and I land in L, then I knew that actually I should have already been in, both have been in L. Otherwise, by using this Booleanness, I should be like definitely outside of L. Okay, so yeah, one could try to like force this to happen, like, you know, demand I've got some kind of like complemented subobject, even if my category wasn't Boolean, but then I don't know if it would be very applicable. So how do you get these systems of locally small systems of factorizations? And this is, you can see here, right? So if I had some locally small category, which, you know, I'm thinking of internal to my category of classes, and some reasonable linear preorder, so like it's down sets, like it's down, you know, the initial, you know, you take an object of C and look at all the things below it in the preorder. You want this to be a set. And so then you can define your left class and your right class basically to be your, you know, all the, you know, LX to Y is all the going down maps, and otherwise I have no maps going down from, you know, if this inequality is the other way around, and the right class is the maps going up. And these give you categories just because a preorder basically forms a category. And this satisfies all the conditions we want. So, and what's really good is that if I have a Boolean class category, and the universal object has some kind of nice linear preorder like that, then every locally small internal category has one of these systems of factorizations. So you should think of this hypothesis as being something like the cumulative hierarchy, right? So in set theory, like the class of all sets is a union of a well-ordered increasing diagram of sets, indexed by the ordinals. And so this gives me the hypothesis or the lemma. And then the second lemma tells me that in fact, it's always going to work, right? Assuming I've got some kind of like cumulative hierarchy on my universal object, then I'll get a system of factorizations for every locally small category. And then we build this new category, C bar. So it's built, it's either you have identity arrows, so you've got the same objects, but you either have an identity arrow, or a non-identity arrow is going to be a pair of a right map and a left map in some order. And then the hypotheses on R and L mean that the arrow component of this functor is composition, and it becomes full. And then you can look at the like the kernel of this functor, and it becomes a congruence on the Hom sets of C bar. All right, so that's this thing, and we claim that this is a concrete category. So in this internalized sense, so what we're going to do is we're going to build a diagram, our internal diagram out of our right class of maps. So for an internal category, if you look at like, you know, let's see, like I mean, for an internal groupoid, for instance, you look at the source fiber or the target fiber, you get an internal diagram on that internal groupoid. But if you've got an internal category, you got to distinguish between internal diagrams and internal presheaves. And the right and left class give these. But from this internal presheaf, we can apply our contravariant, right? And so we think of this internal presheaf as an internal family of sets. Apply the contravariant power object functor. And this is really like fiber-wise. And because it's contravariant, you get a new internal diagram. So the variance changes from a presheaf to a diagram because PS here is contravariant. And so, you know, both of these by hypotheses on the factorizations gives this like small diagrams, right? You know, they're family of like internal families of sets. But the power, like taking the power class fiber-wise, it might not give you a set. So if you've got a class category, then you get this. So I'm continuing to draw a slight distinction because we can get a good result even if we don't assume this sort of last point here. And we can then mash these two things together, this F and this PSG. And moreover, so this gives us an internal diagram. F and the PSG gives us an internal diagram. And this corresponds to a faithful internal functor from my this new category I built to the internal category of sets. Cool. All right, so I need to know that I've got this system of factorizations, but I can generally organize that to be the case. So then you have to do some fooling around. Again, like I emphasize, like I'm not assuming any kind of like choice in the meta theory or whatever. It's just everything's built in a very, I don't know, Ben Abu's paper in Journal of Symbolic Logic, where he talks about fibrations in a very like foundational sense. And I think it had a bit of an impact on me. There's some like really paying attention to like what we do sort of with categories and close to the like the metal of foundations. You know, what is, you know, one can be very blithe and go, well, I'm going to assume universes and choice as needed and a bunch of stuff and all just works. But it's worth paying attention to sometimes the nitty gritty of like what you're actually doing. And so this is a fairly careful proof. It uses, you know, vibrations and so on in a very sort of crucial way. So yeah, so you're essentially building this internal functor via externalization, and then sort of bringing it, it's isomorphic to the externalization of some functor. So there's a link to the slides in the chat, and you can have a look at that if you'd like. Yes, you factor this as a composite of a bunch of things which you can prove faithful. Okay, so as a corollary of this, if you have a Boolean class category and the universal object basically has something like a cumulative hierarchy, every locally small category in E, right? So a locally small category in E is like a large category, but locally small relative to the smallest notion of the class category. Every locally small category is a quotient by an internal congruence of internally concrete category. So internally concrete means I have an internal functor to the internal category of sets. Right, and so this is Kuchera's result. Again, in a very sort of strong foundational system, but now we're in algebraic set theory, and it's now kind of much more hands-off. You can apply it to any foundational system you like that has the sort of nice structural properties. So you can say I want it to do it in like the like definable categories in ZF, right? Definable large categories in ZF, or von Neumann Gödel Bernays without choice, or sort of structural type setups where you go these categories of ideals arising from toposes or something like that. So we can do a little bit better. If we drop back to a basic class category, sort of more predicative mode, where we don't want power classes of small things to be small. So in this case, you have to you have to work externally rather than get an internal functor to the sort of the internal category of sets. You get basically what amounts to a faithful functor from the externalization of this category we build to the codomain fibration. And so it's something like concrete, right? And so like, what is a concrete category? It's like I have a category of objects who are structured sets, and then morphisms which do something. And this is like saying that my objects are like structured classes, and then morphisms which somehow preserve that. So, right, if we're in a very sort of traditional set theoretic mode, the objects of my category being structured proper classes, it's a little bit weird, but if you're careful, this is not too bad. And then you can sort of do all kinds of if there's a knob where you can sort of adjust the assumptions in a much more fine gradations, then you get some intermediate results, like a faithful internal anafunctor. So you can sort of play around with maybe local statements. Okay, so I'm just conscious I've got to wrap up. So, all right. So, these type of categories, the homotopy category, are typical. And so you might go, well, what if I really want to know if I'm concrete? And Freud's argument, sort of characterizing these, was kind of complicated. There's this condition due to Isbell. Essentially, it's something like, where you say I've got some proper class of data, but I can replace it by a small class up to equivalence whenever I come across this. And so Isbell proved that every concretizable category satisfies this condition, and Freud proved the converse. His sort of foundational assumptions weren't obvious. Vinarek proved a much nicer direct version of this. I mean, the theorem was the same, but the proof avoided all the additive categories and embedding theorems and stuff, and was careful about the foundations. But it's the same setup as Kuchera with global choice. And so we can Marty and I can basically prove the same thing in ZF. So no choice at all. So we can we have at least, it's not quite at the level of generality as the first result, because it seems you need some kind of good rank function on your sort of universal object, and so you actually need some well orderings, which we didn't need before. We just need good sort of well-founded linear orders, like, sorry, not well-founded. It's like down segments of the order were sets. Here we actually need the down segments to be finite. Sorry, the down segments to be like usual notion of well ordering, but in internal sense. And we're classical logic here, so we can sort of do a naive type of well ordering. And we need Scott's trick, right? So there's a few more technical things here, but we can at least get rid of the choice. And there's some flexibility as to the foundations. Cool. And just have some references there, and that's all I have. The end.
Thank you very much. Have you questions?
Oops. What I meant to do.
Questions?
Vado. Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Please do.
David, thank you very much for your talk. Have you looked at the work of Pagnan on concrete vibrations, where he tried to give an adaptation of Fry's notion of concrete category in the case of vibrations?
Yes. Yeah, we did look at that. Yeah, we had a bit of a think about that, but we couldn't quite. I mean, I think it's very nice, but it's kind of this is kind of a perpendicular axis in sort of development. I mean, maybe someone can do the push out and figure out how to combine these type of notions, but it was a type of thing where we would, it was getting very baroque to try to combine the two notions, and it all became very technical. So we thought we'll just at least do this one. Yeah, that was a very nice paper, I must admit. Just that would be a future work type of thing.
Thank you.
Other questions?
Non, tu applaudis, Anatole? Parce que j'entends pas les applaudissements. Alors, si tu applaudis, il faut qu'on entende les applaudissements.
Comment? Comme ça?
Ben voilà, comme ça.
Bon.